Hey guys, this is Neena Perez, and this is Straight Talk, no sugar added. Thank you so much for being here. This show is created to discuss life topics to grow, challenge, and transform your thinking. And today I have someone who is really going around and changing everybody's thinking and what they're doing to be aware of their surroundings and others. And so I'm so glad she is here. Her name is Janice Lintz, and she is an accomplished consultant and advocate across the hearing access advocacy and related political spectrum. She is the CEO of Hearing Access and Innovations, which is the leading company dedicated to helping the world's businesses, cultural and entertainment institutions, government agencies, and mass transit organizations improve their ability for people with hearing loss. And you know what, Janice? I'm really glad you're here because I think these are things that unless you're walking in that space, you don't think about. Right? How difficult that might be for others. And when you're just walking around in your everyday life, you're just not thinking that other people might be having some issues or struggles with these, type of lack of services, if you will. So how are you, Janice?
Very good. And thank you so much, Neena, for having me. And yes, you're correct. Until my family entered this sphere, I really didn't think about it as well. It's like everything. There's only so much brain space we each have. And, right. You can't focus on everything when you would never get through the day. So you focus on what's important to your family. And my goal is just to make sure that people are having the access they need to make this issue relevant to everyone.
Yeah. So, I would like to get into that. So if you don't mind, I'd love to know a little bit more about you. And then I'd like to get into how you got into the space. Why is this important to you?
Perfect.
Let's do it. Who are you, Janice Lintz?
Well, I have a marketing background. I went to law school. I had a son who died and then a daughter who almost died and then was diagnosed with a hearing loss. And it was from that I suddenly was thrust into this field. I'm also a voracious traveler. I've traveled to 194 countries, territories, and unrecognized nations. And so while I would travel, I would see what access was available or wasn't available in various countries, but there were bits and pieces as I saw things, and I used that to track and create a best practice approach to hearing access.
Wow.
And my goal now is to implement that globally.
Wow. So did you take your daughter to all of these countries as well?
She hasn't been to all of them, but she and my son are well-traveled. And she's in her own right a really strong traveler. So my son was at the top of the Eiffel Tower when I think he was 6 weeks old, and 4 weeks he was in London. My goal was my kids were going to love to travel.
Yeah. First, I'm sorry about your loss, because that's a huge thing. And then for your daughter, it's really great that you decided to do something, though, Janice, because sometimes we would just do what our daughter needs right now, right? What she needs, without thinking how you can change the system altogether. And that's what you're doing, right? I mean, you decided to really start implementing what you're learning and changing the system. Is that right?
Yes, but I have to say, I was like the person who focused on what my daughter needed.
Of course.
So I think after my son died during delivery, and I had this quote team of experts, that I had selected, the best doctors in New York City, I stopped really trusting experts with their opinions. And then when my daughter was diagnosed, and the doctor immediately after telling me the diagnosis told me there were special schools for her, I was like, I live in New York City. My idea of special and your idea of special, I think, are different. I didn't say that to her, but that's what I thought in my head. And I wasn't willing to change my standards. So it was easier to change the world. But the projects I worked on initially benefited our family. We would go to productions. I remember being at Lincoln Center and going to see Peter and the Wolf and having to get up 4 times in the middle of the show because the device they gave was broken. And she couldn't hear. Now try telling, I think she was about 4. Try telling a 4-year-old who can't hear to sit quiet for an entire show. Well, and she's smart enough to know what she's missing. Right. It's impossible. So I had to get up. And of course we were seated in a place. So she could see, as well. And so I had to disrupt this over and over again. And it was mortifying. It made a scene in terms of like getting up and asking people in the middle of performance to get out because you're smack in the middle of the row.
Right.
And it was ridiculous. And I didn't understand why this was and why it couldn't be fixed. And so as I started working on our family's problems, everyone else benefited. And now my daughter is situated. She's in graduate school at an Ivy League university, having gone to an Ivy League university undergrad. She's situated, but along the way, I found my own passion. And that's part of why I went to law school, was to change the world. And I realized this was it.
Wow. Janice, you said, I'm not going to change my standards. It's easier to change the world. Not everybody wakes up with that attitude, woman.
It's really, I function. I am the type of person who like, no, this isn't working. You need to fix it.
Right.
And not some pipe dream. Yeah, one day we will fix it. Let's set up a timeline and get this done.
That is amazing.
And anyone who interacts with me really knows that's the way I function. I mean, I recently just changed transparency in medical billing in the city of New York for 2 major hospitals. And I think when they thought I was doing it, I called up and said, no, this has to be done. I think they thought, yeah, one day. I'm like, no, you have a choice. We're either going to make this happen, or I'm filing a complaint with the New York State Attorney General today.
Right.
So like, let's understand what the timeline is here.
Right.
It changed.
I love it.
I was right. You can't just send someone a bill that says you owe $25. What date of service? Who's the provider? What were you paid by insurance? Like some basics here. Who just writes, you owe me $25. Sure, I'll be happy to pay. So
right. Well, most people do. Most people
do.
Yeah.
And you know what? And that's one of the things that I have come to learn to realize from the work that I've done. There were a lot of people who, because of either socioeconomic or education, are unable to stand up for the rights they have. My family has been privileged in terms of the access we've had, the people who have worked with us. And I can never, ever thank all of them. So my way to pay it forward is to solve some of these very complex problems that I know I can, that will benefit everyone. So like, for example, the medical billing. I know there are a lot of people who English may not be their first language. They're older adults. They're intimidated by threats of law. So I solve it. And also I feel like I'm planning for my future. God forbid you have these problems when you're sick. Good luck. You can't do it. So I solve them. And I actually get joy from fixing these problems.
That's amazing. But so are other people. They're benefiting from Janice getting joy out of this.
Yeah, I do. Amazing. You know what? And when people, and a lot of times people will tell me, and it's like, I am thrilled because, and the funny thing is when I deal with the people on the phone, let's say on the medical billing, they're like, yes, we don't want to pay these bills. I'm like, so then why do you expect me to pay a bill like that? Right. And they're like, and like no one ever picks up the phone. And I think that's the most curious thing is people see problems, but it doesn't occur to them they can solve it. And my goal is to help people. Yeah. And that's why I've been doing the podcast, how people can affect change for the problems that bother them.
Yeah. And I want to know about that. Like, how did you start going about affecting change when it came to people with hearing loss? What was your strategy? What's the plan?
So I started with my daughter's religious school. She told me she couldn't go to religious school because she couldn't hear. I said, nice try. Kids, since the start of religion, have been trying to get out of religious school. It doesn't matter what religion you're in, but nobody wants to go. I said, nice try. So in our case, it was a temple. I went to the rabbi, and it's a wealthy congregation. It's where Mayor Bloomberg went, and a former governor. And there's like a movers and shakers in this particular temple. And so I went to the head rabbi and he said, tell me what you need. And I told him and he said, done. I was like, that's it? Like, you didn't ask the cost. He's like, no, this is what you need. It's the right thing to do. We will do it. And I couldn't believe it was that simple.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Right? He's since passed, but he was one of these great people in life that there are not a lot of him.
Right.
He was just, Rabbi Posner was just one of these incredible people. But I realized that sometimes that's all it is. It's a lack of people not having any idea about the problem, not understanding what they need to do. And when you tell them and you provide a simple turnkey solution, it's done. So I decided at that point, this was easy. Let's see what else. Like, we can't go to the theater. So I went to a theater company who I knew from a little research had some problems with the Department of Justice. So they would be listening because they would not want the Department of Justice involved again.
Right.
And I was right. And they helped solve that problem. I was like, okay, this isn't so hard. Like, I'll just fix this.
Right.
And I started moving along. And along the way, I realized if I only worked with brand name places, names that were recognizable across the country, I could then leverage those projects. So for example, when you fix Lincoln Center, which was really complicated because each theater is a separate fiefdom. And, but when you solve that, first off, everybody knows how in New York City, how complicated Lincoln Center is structured. So when you solve that, that says, okay, you could get things done. But if you, let's say I go to Boise, Idaho to a theater,
right?
They know Lincoln Center. And it's easy to say, well, it's in Lincoln Center, you can do it. And then I started realizing, oh, they would say, but that's Lincoln Center, they have so much money. So then I started working with small institutions like the Lower East Side Tenement Museum. So I had a contrast to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Like, okay,
right,
so are you small or you big? Because I've worked with the whole range,
right.
you know, and, you know, that's not a good enough excuse. And I started realizing that as I solved these problems with name recognizable names, that I could then leverage them across the country and then globally. And that's what I started doing.
That's amazing. Wow. What one person will do if you really want to do something, right? So what is it that you're doing exactly? Like, what are you implementing?
In the beginning, it was just getting in something called an assistive listening system that brings sound from the speakers, the people, let's say, on stage, to a person's hearing aid or cochlear implant. Okay. In the beginning, I used a system that was called either an FM radio frequency or infrared, a point of light. And you had to wear a device. But these devices are very stigmatizing. And my daughter didn't want to wear that. I mean, can you imagine if you, it's like, you know, nobody wants to wear some device on them. And then on one trip to England, I found out about this system called an induction loop that allowed the sound to electromagnetically jump to a person's hearing aid. When they switched to a telecoil, a T setting on their hearing aid or cochlear implant, suddenly no device was needed.
Wow.
And now no broken device, no asking permission to hear. In that case of Lincoln Center, there was this woman who didn't particularly care. And so she didn't really maintain the devices. She did afterwards. That 4 times during a Lincoln Center. Trust me, when I coincidentally, and I also think like things happen for a reason, and I'm very into karma. I happened to be invited to a political event, and the head of Lincoln Center was staying at a friend's house just randomly. Right. And I told him the story. That woman learned to care afterwards.
Right.
He was not very happy. She also withheld my driver's license because you had to give a driver's license. I didn't understand, you know, what if you don't drive, you don't have an ID? Like, you know, this comes into a big problem. But with the induction loop, you can hear directly. There's nobody giving your driver's license to anyone. There's no charging. You know, kids break the devices, people drop the devices. It's just easy. So I became a big proponent. But one of the things is educating people that hearing access is a spectrum, and that depending on where you are in the spectrum, the access you need. And as I developed something called the 3-prong approach, you need audio, bringing the sound to a person's ear, similar to my wearing, you know, a headset. Visual, so having captions. So like on videos, always having captions. And then qualified interpretation. As you further down this, you know, where you're deaf, then you use sign language. But most people think sign language, but of the 48 million people in the United States who have hearing loss, only 2 million people, and likely less, use sign language. So critical to the people who need it, but it's a smaller population than people realize, but you can see it, which is why people think of it all the time.
Right.
So my goal and mission, what started out as just assistive listening systems, is making sure everyone implements what I call the 3-prong approach and having that become the global standard. And it is shifting that way. In the beginning, no one understood hearing loss was a spectrum. They didn't get it. Right. I developed a visual that now helps people to understand it. And now when they see the visual, they like, oh, that makes perfect sense. There was a lack of education. The major hearing loss organizations were not educating people on it. I frankly didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
And that was part of the problem. I didn't
Right.
really think, a lot of these nonprofits, it's not really clear what they do
Right.
except raise money. And I really wanted things to benefit my daughter. And I had a time crunch. She was 4 when I really started implementing this. But
Right.
suddenly you become very aware that she's going to be in college. I got to get this done fast. I had a real sense of urgency.
Right. Right. Has she been able to enjoy these things? Like, has she been able to go to the Lincoln Center or go to any of these places where you've already implemented all of this?
Oh yes, and it's amazing. I mean, and every single project has come from a problem our family encountered. So, for
Mhm.
example, when we were in Japan and her flight was changed and she didn't hear the announcement, excuse me, and so I reached out to the person at the gate where I was. We were flying into different airports, so we had different gates because she was going back to college. I was going home, and the gate agent wouldn't go and tell my daughter, and I couldn't leave my gate area. Right.
Right.
And I was like, this is crazy. So I
Right.
tweeted and messaged to AA, American Airlines, and they gave me a ridiculous response. By that point, I'm savvy enough to know, save the tweet,
Right.
save the message.
Right.
It's going into some federal comment, which it did. And, people, yeah.
They didn't know who they were talking to, Janice.
Don't underestimate me. Seriously, just don't. And so it was ridiculous, but it made the need for adding induction loops and adding the technology to airports. And now when you fly into airports in the US, you're seeing as airports renovate, they're adding induction loop technology. So it's in Detroit, it's in Atlanta. Certain airlines, other airlines are following it. It hasn't been mandated yet, but it's moving. It's obvious it's moving in that direction because it's now, like when John F. Kennedy Airport is renovating, it's in the plans. I don't even have to discuss it. It's already there.
That's great.
And that is a dramatic change.
That's amazing.
But every single problem, every single change that's happened, it's come from our family's problems. We had a lot of problems.
Yeah, but now it's a solution, right, to the world, because, you think that because, hearing loss have been around for centuries, right, that somebody would have thought about this or figured this out. I guess what you're saying is facts, right? Especially the part of what are these nonprofits really doing? I mean, they've been doing this for so long. How did no one think about this, right? I guess they just needed a Janice, but now they got one. So there you are.
It's even more complicated. The major hard of hearing organizations are heavily funded by hearing aid companies. And hearing aid companies are really don't like this telecoil because what it does is it makes every single hearing aid the same. And it's a $50 device. So if you're selling an $8,000 hearing aid and you want to distinguish your hearing aid from from brand B, like your brand A, and you want to distinguish from brand B, you need something, you want to say, no, we have mask enhancement, or we want to have restaurant, enhancement. What are these things? Right. And the problem was the FDA was not testing hearing aids. This is going to change thanks to the new proposed regulations for over-the-counter hearing aids. And I'm actually instrumental. It was my testimony that affected that change. But nobody's testing these devices that they claim they have. There's no generic name, so you can't cancel it. It can't compare them. Consumer Reports couldn't even compare them.
Wow.
Then you have these hearing aid companies heavily funding nonprofits. So the nonprofits are not testifying or doing anything besides hosting walks and annual conferences is the best I could figure out what they're doing. Right. And so they become more like social organizations, which is important to many people, but it's not being a change agent and not affecting change. And then you couple in. So those are the first two. You have the hearing aid manufacturers not wanting this. Right. You have them funding the nonprofits. And then the third is the stigma. And so many people with a hearing loss don't come forward and don't want to discuss their hearing loss. So, for example, you have like Mayor Bloomberg needs hearing aids. He wasn't wearing them for a while. I don't know if he is now. President Clinton wears hearing aids, but he won't discuss them. Right. So when you have other really powerful people who are not discussing their hearing loss, that doesn't affect change.
That's true.
And so what happens is the only people who are discussing their hearing loss are the people who have taken their hearing loss and become, as an identity, right? Rather than another facet of them. So for example, I have blonde hair. you would never call me the blonde. It would be really offensive,
Right.
right? If you did, but
Right.
if you call me, if let's say I have a hearing loss, and you call someone the hearing impaired or hard of hearing, right? That becomes your identity,
Yeah.
right?
That makes sense.
Someone who's disabled, right? The people who call it as disabled, they take identity, but they're a very small, loud group. The vast majority of people with hearing loss are not part of that. The vast majority, they don't self-identify. In fact, there's no data because they don't even count themselves as part of data.
Right.
So if you're not identifying this as an issue, I mean, my mother was one of these people. If you asked her before she died whether she had a hearing loss, she will tell you no. But I am confident that you heard her when she called me, you could hear the conversation because she spoke so loud, right? Clearly, she had a hearing loss. Right. I was working on this and I was offended, but she could not admit she had a hearing loss and never got a hearing aid before she died.
Wow.
But so she was relying on captions and other things. She would go to the theater and get a headset. Oh, they mumble, right? So she didn't view that as an assistive technology that she needed. It was because the actors mumbled.
Right. Right.
And so if somebody like that is not advocating or asking for access because they have a hearing loss, it's hard to get the access implemented. And that is those three problems coupled together is why nothing advances.
Yeah. And it's a big problem. Yeah.
It's a huge problem. And then you have like places like the UN where you have someone in charge of there is a fourth that I failed to mention. You have people with other disabilities making decisions about people with hearing loss. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you would never ask one race to make decisions about another race. But all too often, the person who is the access coordinator uses a wheelchair, is blind, or is deaf. Because you want someone who everyone can tell has a disability, right? Hard of hearing, you can't see the hearing aids. It looks like, quote, a regular person. Right. So you don't want them when they're speaking to represent your organization. So suddenly, the person who is using a wheelchair, is deaf, or visually impaired is making decisions about the access that people who are hard of hearing need. That's crazy and offensive. And when you call them out about it, they get really offended.
Right, of course.
But like if suddenly I was
one
race making a decision about another race, I would be called a million different names.
Right.
And rightly so. I'm against this. But yet it doesn't seem problematic when one disability does it against another.
Yeah, that's so strange. I did not know that. Yeah.
So, like, for example, the UN has this assistive technology guidelines, and the person making decisions about it doesn't have hearing loss. It doesn't think induction loops are necessary globally. Really? How is that possible?
How is that possible? Yeah.
Right? How is this? It's in other countries. I sent him photos from 23 different countries that I know of, right? I'm like, all these countries, like, are we always going to go and just work towards if the country you're from can't afford it? That doesn't mean the other country shouldn't have it.
Right.
It's not a mandate. It's a guidelines. And this is the fight. And so you have to call people out. And many people are very uncomfortable not mincing words. I have no problem not mincing words.
I see.
It's a waste of time.
Yeah,
right?
No, it is. It is. And you're getting to the point, right? You have to get things done. And I think there was a lot of mincing words already, and that's why nothing's been done. So that's good. Kudos to you. So I want to know before I let you go, though, how does my audience, and, I have a brother who's hearing impaired. So I totally get that. And he yells and screams all the time because he won't put on his hearing aid. But how can people get involved with what you're doing? Like, are you a nonprofit, or is there a way for people to find out about what you do and things like that?
Well, first off, he probably has the wrong hearing aids, which is why he doesn't.
Probably, yeah.
He doesn't like them, and hopefully this over-the-counter regulations will help him because they're going to be testing hearing aids, and it's probably because he has the wrong hearing aids. I am reachable. My advocacy work is on janicelintz.com. My consulting work is at hearingaccess.com. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn under Janice Lintz.
Okay, great. So I'll make sure to link all of that below so that people can reach out, because it's a larger community than people think. And like I said, I even have a brother who has a hearing impaired, and I don't never really advocated for him or anything. I don't know much about it. I know that I'm always like, do you have your batteries? Let me get your batteries, that kind of thing, because he's like, what? Oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm like, oh God, here we go. He's screaming like your mom. It's adorable and not at the same
It's not
time.
adorable. It's really actually irritating.
Janice, you are so fun. I'm really, really glad we got to meet. I really love your spirit. I love what you're doing, and you're just a go-getter, and you're going to make some seriously big changes. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Neena, for having me. This was great. And
I'm
thank
so
you so
glad.
much.
Thank you. And guys, don't forget to subscribe and share this video. Also, because you need to reach more people and see this amazing work that Janice is doing. I'm going to make sure to link all of her information below so that you can really follow what she's doing, support what she's doing, and see if you can help out in some way so that you can also become a voice for change. So thank you guys so much for watching. This is Neena Perez. This is Straight Talk, no sugar added. Until next time.
This broadcast is brought to you by Winject Studios. We are an all-in-one educational platform for podcasters that revolutionizes how hosts leverage content to increase engagement with listeners, downloads, and income. We come together to focus on community, collaboration, and collective impact. For more information on how you can interact directly with our hosts, access exclusive live content with offers you can't get anywhere else from our official partners, join our purpose-driven community by visiting www.winject.com. If you're ready to build a career doing what you love, then we're ready to see you there.